Can you spot what's wrong with this shot? Can you tell what makes this shot boring or uninteresting? It's the lack of movement. And you might be surprised that that is exactly what makes the Hohem M2 and the Zion or Xeon Crane M3S so different. Because even though these two are gimbals, they do things very differently and they both offer something that the other one doesn't. The big question is, which one is right for you? In terms of price, these two gimbals are priced very similar on all configurations, so there is not really much gain of one over the other. The MT2 has a battery life of 17 hours, the Crane M3S of around 7.5 hours. That's a really big difference. And theoretically, the Crane M3S makes up for it on a higher payload. It has a 1.5 kilo payload, whereas the MT2 has an advertised payload of 1.2 kilos. The reality of this is that I have found that the MT2 can handle a higher payload than the Crane M3S because the MT2 gives you more clearance and more room to play with. The Crane M3S could handle the same payload, but it couldn't handle the sunshade. And the sunshade or the sun hood is an accessory that I think everybody should have. Because if you happen to be using your gimbal with the sun in front of the camera, you are potentially risking having lens flares or glaring on the actual lens because of the angle the light from the sun hits the lens. And this is something that you cannot get rid of in post, or is extremely difficult. If you get this sun hood or sunshade, it's almost like having a matte box, but without the weight of the matte box. So even though on paper the Crane M3S has a higher payload, in real life practical terms, I think the MT2 can actually handle a higher payload. Both gimbals offer you the ability to lock all three axes and is really well implemented. The Crane M3S feels slightly better design and the switches feel a little bit easier to engage and disengage. Bottom line is all three motors are locked and you can move around and transport them without any problems. Now, in terms of mounting accessories, this is where the MT2 has an advantage over the Crane M3S because they both give you the ability to mount accessories on the side of the gimbal with a 1/4-inch thread, but the MT2 gives you an additional mounting point on the roll axis motor. And that is very helpful because sometimes you may struggle based on the payload that you want to put on the gimbal to balance the roll axis. And this is a very important axis to have correctly balanced. And by having the ability to just easily add the weights directly into the gimbal itself rather than having to use clamps, makes the gimbal a lot easier to balance. It's just little details like this that make a gimbal stand out from the competition. So in that regard, I personally think the MT2 has better functionality. Browsing the menus through the LCD screen, it's a real joy on the Crane M3S. The screen is really responsive, there is no delay, it's very bright. You can actually see the screen on a bright sunny day, which is not the same with many other gimbals. And it has a feature that the MT2 doesn't have, which is deadband. And this is a feature that is really important to be able to adjust to get really smooth shots. The MT2, on the other hand, the LCD screen is, in my opinion, a bit of a letdown because for a gimbal this size, aiming for this market, you would expect that it would have a much more comprehensive screen. Saying all of that, everything that you can do on the Crane M3S, you can do on the MT2 via the Hohem app. So all the adjustments and the settings happen on the actual app, and the integration between the app and the gimbal on the Hohem is really well implemented. There is no delays, but you kind of wish that you could do a lot of the adjustments on the actual gimbal rather than having to rely on an app. Personally, I hardly do any adjustments on the fly. Once I set up my gimbal, that pretty much is it. That's something that might be different with you. But regardless of all of that, the browsing of the menu and the adjustment of settings, it's much easier and better implemented on the Crane M3S by a long stretch. But this gimbal gives you the ability to do remote on-off switch, connecting a USB-C cable from the gimbal to the camera. The question is whether you're comfortable having a cable from the gimbal to the camera because it may affect balancing. But they both do it and they do it really well. The area where the Crane M3S, in my opinion, is vastly superior to the MT2 at this moment in time because this is something that can be fixed with a firmware upgrade by Hohem. it's on the Bluetooth connectivity and the controlling of the camera. Because on the Cren M3S, this is done really nice, and you can control the shutter, the aperture, the remote on off, even focus and the ISO, all within the gimbal itself in the same sub-menu option. You can switch from one to the other really quick. I mean, you could literally do all of this on the fly. And this is something that I haven't experienced with the Hohem MT2. Essentially, the Cren M3S is a gimbal for filming horizontal, okay? It's not designed for vertical, even though you have a vertical mode, but it's really cumbersome, it's really weird the way you have to hold the gimbal, and it's just very uncomfortable. It's okay for a one-off shot, but it's not something that you would use on a permanent basis. The MT2, on the other hand, you have an on-the-fly adjustment, so you could literally be filming horizontal and then literally within a matter of a second switch to vertical. It works really good for those moments where you need to cut something, really quick. And if you want something that is more permanent, it actually has a vertical mode. You slide the plate and then you mount it vertically. The adjustments are done very quickly and you have no restrictions of movement whatsoever. You can do every movement that you do horizontal, you can do it vertically on the MT2. In that regard, the MT2 is a far, far superior gimbal than the M3S. In general terms, I feel the Cren M3S has a slightly better stabilization, and you also get the adjustments for deadpan. And that's something that you don't have on the MT2, and that makes a big difference when it comes to getting really smooth shots. So you eliminate those micro movements that you have to deal with the MT2. This comes down to the stabilization that you might have on your lens and on your camera. Does this mean that the stabilization on the MT2 is bad? Absolutely not. If you know what you're doing, you won't be able to tell the difference between the Cren M3S and the MT2. This is just my opinion, it's all very subjective. But I think if Hohem does a firmware upgrade and they include deadpan adjustments, the MT2 will handle just as good in terms of stabilization as the Cren M3S. But the one area where the MT2 offers something that the Cren M3S doesn't is when it comes to tracking, because the MT2 has this AI tracker. With this tracker, this gimbal can become your camera assistant. It's really well implemented and you can easily adjust the headroom if you want it to be lower. This is something that a lot of the tracking software cannot do. And you even have a remote control that Hohem offers, so you can do this at a distance and you don't even need to be right there by the gimbal. So this is really good. Another thing that this AI tracker does that is really, really good is that maybe if you film yourself walking into the shot, you might want to be on the right or the left side of the frame and not so much in the middle of it. You can position yourself on the edge of whichever side of the frame that you want, and then the tracker will keep you always on that edge of the frame rather than in the middle. This tracker is fantastic for tracking faces and people. So in that regard, for tracking, the MT2 is such a vast superior gimbal. And this is what I said earlier in the video, that each of these gimbals give you something that the other one doesn't. The Cren M3S will give you a slightly better stabilization, but a much better experience in terms of adjustments and browsing of the menus with that fantastic LCD screen. But the MT2 will give you far better adjustment from horizontal to vertical and actual vertical filming. And this AI tracker, this is something that the Cren M3S doesn't offer. So you have to decide what's important for you. Having a gimbal that offers you really good stabilization and a really good user experience, or having a gimbal like the Hohem that may not be as refined as the Cren M3S, but it gives you vertical filming and AI tracking for your filming. So if this is something that you think you're gonna find useful, the MT2 is the way to go. If you are considering any of these two gimbals and wanna watch my review of the Crane M3S or my review of the MT2, I leave them up here and I think you're gonna find them really helpful and interesting. So click on any of them and I'll see you there.